George Belecki here with Dakota Randall, fresh off the Patriots preseason opener against the Giants. The Pats lost, but it's just a preseason game. The offense put up 21 points. But Dakota, I want to ask you, who are two players from the Patriots that stood out in their debut for the Pats?
Yeah, I think more than a few players, but for me, if I'm going to narrow it down, I'm going to start with linebacker Mac Wilson. This is a guy who the Patriots acquired during the offseason in the Chase Winovich trade from the Cleveland Browns, and he was really a guy who, the last few years we've been talking about how the Patriots need more speed and explosion at linebacker, and that's something he brings. Now, it's remained to be seen whether he can be truly a productive and effective player in this Patriots defense. His playing time really trended downward over his last couple of years in Cleveland. But he's looked great in practices. The speed has really showed up. He's kind of been all over the field, and that was the case again last night against the Giants. I think he had something like 5 or 6 tackles. He had a big QB pressure on Daniel Jones in the first half, where he kind of had a free run, but he got there in a split second, and he was just kind of flying all over the field. There were plays where the play was sort of nearing its end on one sideline. He was on the other side of the field and would dart all the way across, and it's just good to see. It's just we haven't seen a lot of that over the last few years with the Patriots. And another player who really stood out for me was rookie defensive lineman Sam Roberts. This is a 6th-round pick, and he's a guy who, when you see him at practice, he really stands out because I believe he's 6'5", he's 295. He's just really built. Like, you look at him and you're like, that guy could dominate. And for whatever reason, and it's probably why it was a 6th-round pick, he really hasn't done much in practice. He hasn't really, looked good or bad or anything. We haven't really seen him do much of anything. So expectations weren't really high in this game. And yet he was arguably the best player on the field. I think he led the Patriots with 5 quarterback pressures. It would have been a 6th if not for he drew a hold, and then it was called a no play, so he didn't get credit for it. I think he finished with 5 or 6 tackles. And I mean, again, second half preseason game, going against a lot of backups, not a top flight offense, all those caveats, but he was a menace out there, and it just, it's going to be interesting to see if he can carry it over next week into the joint practices with the Carolina Panthers.
Mac Wilson out of Alabama, you mentioned his playing time has dropped off with the Browns, but last season his least amount of snaps played had a PFF grade, a career high of 75. And for Sam Roberts, well, he went to the Alabama of Division II in Northwest Missouri State. So those were two guys that stood out to you, Dakota. What were two duds when you looked at the Pats players?
Yeah, one of them, and this is someone who was a common dud during the regular season last year and really throughout his time in New England, and that's cornerback Juwan Williams. It's kind of obvious at this point that we're in the final days of his career in New England. The former 2nd-round pick just hasn't really done anything with his opportunities. He's had some flashes during his time here when he's been on the field, but it's more often than not, it hasn't been good. Hasn't looked fast enough. He's certainly got the size to be an impactful cornerback or maybe safety, but it just hasn't been able to put it all together. And last night, I mean, he got turned around by receiver Richie James. I think he had a face mask penalty in the second half at one point, and he played virtually all night. Which is kind of a sign that, Patriots don't really expect him to have a roster spot. They're kind of giving him an opportunity to prove something. But all he really proved last night that it's just more of the same from him. And it's unfortunate, 2nd-round pick, but it just doesn't look like he has much more of a future here. And second, I'm actually going to go with 2 players, and that's the rookie running backs, Pierre Strong and Kevin Harris. Now, it's not uncommon for young running backs, especially rookies with the Patriots, to either not be productive or not look comfortable during their first training camp and preseason with the Patriots. And that's been the case for Strong and Harris this offseason. With Strong, he's been dealing with an injury. We don't really know the details of that. He's finally started to ramp up his workload, but still, we haven't really seen him pop much. Guy's known for his speed, and we haven't really seen that yet. Kevin Harris, 6th-round pick, less expected from him. But again, he hasn't really showed up and done much in practice either. And that was more the same in the game last night, where I think Kevin Harris had a touchdown, but he had 6 carries for 9 yards, not really much there. I think he had 1 catch for -2 yards. Pierre Strong had a 9-yard rush in the second half, but otherwise, I think he was 5 carries for 19 yards, caught 1 pass, didn't get any yards with it. And it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm down on either of them, that I don't think they could be good players, especially Strong. I think he certainly has a skill set to be, but it's just, if they don't start to turn this around in the near future, it's questionable whether either of them could have a role on this team at the start of the season. It's looking more and more like Ty Montgomery is the clear passing down back. But we'll see. There's a long way to go, but just haven't seen much from them yet.
Damian Harris, Ramondre Stevenson, Ty Montgomery. That's a shoo-in for the top 3 running backs on the Patriots depth chart. So all eyes were on the players, but also on the sidelines. because of the play calling. We saw Matt Patricia handle the offense when the starters were out there, give or take who was playing. Actually, that's a number one. And then Joe Judge, the quarterback coach for the Pats, taking over when the backups were in. Bill Belichick asked after the game about if he has a decision on who that will be in the regular season, said, don't worry about it. We're going to, because there's a lot of things to worry about with this offense. What did you see from the play calling last night? And did you see a lead for either guy, Patricia or Judge, to take over that role?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I still think it's Matt Patricia, and I still have no idea how that works because one of the things I've talked about a lot is I don't see how he can both coach the offensive lineman and call plays during the game. I mean, we've seen with an offensive line coach in between drives, they're over with the offensive lineman, they're coaching them up, they're going through things on the tablet, they're giving him a pep talk. And Matt Patricia did some of that last night. He called plays, like you said, when Brian Hoyer was in the game in the first quarter, and then after those drives would end, he would go over and confer with both Belichick and Joe Judge. They would meet together, and then he'd walk over to the offensive linemen who actually were getting coached up at the time by David Andrews, who wasn't playing. I saw somewhere that Billy Yates, the assistant, might have been up in the press box or in a box upstairs and then come down for the second half. I'm not positive about that. But either way, it was just Patricia was all over the place. He was doing that in the first quarter. In the second half, he was kind of meeting with different players on the offense, splitting time with the offensive line, huddling up with Judge and Belichick. So it just added more mystery to this. And then, like you said, Joe Judge was calling plays when Bailey Zappi was in the game, which was the vast majority of the game. And then he would meet with the quarterbacks, which wasn't a surprise because he's listed as the quarterbacks coach. But again, I think the one thing that really stands out to me is it's very clearly a collaboration. Like, I don't know who's going to end up as the play caller. Again, I think it's Matt Patricia because all the reporting indicates that. And the fact that he was the play caller at the start of the game leads me to believe that. But it's clear that Belichick, Judge, and Patricia all have a lot of input on this. And the mystery continues, which is unfortunate. We'd like some clarity on this topic. I think a lot of us are sick of talking about it. But so as long as what happened last night continues to happen, it's going to remain a mystery.
And it was interesting, too. We saw the limited playbook, and it is preseason game number one, but the Pats didn't run a single play action pass. That's their bread and butter. So that says all we need to know about how much of the playbook Patricia or Judge actually called. Guy that's always got my back and says everything we need to know. And the clear cut, one of our best insiders for the Pats is Dakota Randall. Thanks for joining me, brother.
Thank you.